thanks, Joel. I'm going to cover some of the basic stuff up front for the Market Center, the team meeting stuff. If you don't mind, put your questions that you might have in chat, because I don't want to slow it down. There's a lot of slides and a lot of content. We absolutely are recording it. I will absolutely share with you all the slides and materials and resources that we have, so you have something to go back on. But try not to, if you can help it, try not to ask questions in between, because it's going to throw off the time, and I want to get people in and out as quickly as possible. So with that being said, let me share my my screen, and Tony, whose video is not working, he will chime in from now and again to keep me straight, to correct me when I'm making error here. So, okay, so here's a team meeting. To build careers worth having, businesses worth owning, lives worth living, experiences worth giving, and legacies worth leaving is what our mission is. And I'm sure all of you have seen this before. God, family, then business. This shows up. This has shown up just recently, as a matter of fact. So that it is really in that order, and that's something that we're proud of. We put people before profits. Here's our belief system. And here's a message. Ray's on vacation, a well deserved and well earned vacation, and she wanted me to pass the message along to you guys to make sure that you pay your CE, otherwise you'll be signed off. And as licensees and as professionals, we want to make sure that we maintain our certain standards and requirements and so forth. So make sure that you pay those. As you guys know, KW is a technology company that provides that platform for real estate agents to really launch themselves into a different stratosphere on productivity and building their career. As we continue to grow, we have a bunch of new agents. So some of them are coming from our Kauai Market Center, and some are new agents. So if you see them around the Market Center, if you see them on Zoom, if you see them in different classes, make sure you welcome them and offer them any help that they might need. Here is the top producing agents for January. And I think there's a couple of you that are here right now. So Sam is in there. Congratulations, Sam. Christine's in there. Congratulations. So thanks for not only being a top producer. I think Maria's in here too. Thanks for not only being a top producer, but continuing that growth mindedness too. Here's the Market Center numbers, which is overall, we're doing really well. As you see, the only negative that you see on here is listings taken, listing volume. And that's indicative to the lack of inventory. But as you guys know from the class that we brought to you last week, which is Listing Clinic with Gene Rivers, it doesn't mean you have to rest at that and just accept that to be the fact. You can go out and create your own inventory. So how do you do that? You can call on FSBOs. You can contact your sphere and get ahead of and ask when they're interested in selling, and hopefully get that prior to it going on the market with anyone else. Here's our numbers compared to the region. So overall, again, we're doing pretty well with the exception of the listings taken, but that's a inventory shortage thing. You guys have probably seen this. This is a slide that goes out. It's posted on our social media. It's also emailed out to you by Christy. And this is where we are in comparison to our local MLS. For Hawaii people, or Kauai people, this is for High Central specifically. But we are doing well in comparison to other companies on our MLS. So this is last month's one, but our conference rooms are open. So please take advantage of it if you need it. Upcoming events, family reunion is upcoming. It's on the 19th to the 22nd. If you're not going in person, I think that they've already turned off that switch. So if you're intending on going, you have to go virtually now, as opposed to in person. So I'd highly recommend doing that. When you do virtual, not only is it less expensive, but all the content, the videos and classes and so forth are recorded, and you can go back and check on that. I think you have access to it up to, if I'm not mistaken, 60 days after the event. The keynote speaker is going to be Sean Archer, sorry. And he's a best-selling author. There's going to be different tracks or breakout tracks that you can choose from. You can hop around to different classes, but if you choose a track, it better helps you jump right into exactly what you're trying to focus on. So if you're a single agent, helps you grow as a single agent. If you're on a team, you can pick that track, but you can still jump around. the recordings of that will allow you to view any and all of the breakouts in total for up to 60 days after the event. So if you're going to go in person, if you guys are attending virtually, then obviously it's safe, right? Because you don't have to mingle with anyone. Afterwards, we're going to have a panel that's going to be coming soon. It'll be via Zoom, excuse me. And so far we have Maria has been asked to attend as a panelist. Catherine Pinnell is going to be a panelist, and we'll get a few more as well. And the point of that too is to kind of bring back some of the networking, some of the information that they've gathered to us, and also what we can all do to execute, because you can attend as many classes as you want, as many trainings as you want, as many conferences as you want. If you don't have a plan of attack and an action item and what you're going to execute, and then it really doesn't matter, right? So we want to make sure that not only do we bring you that information, but how we're going to execute it and put it into our business. So here's some upcoming classes for diversity. Some lead gen through Command Marketplace. KW Prep, if you guys haven't heard already, Keller Williams is super disruptive, and I mean that in a good way, a positive way, in that we have a school which is called K-Score and KW Prep. Those two kind of work in conjunction, and we are making it free for students. So the disruptive thing is, if anyone is out there interested in getting into real estate, the traditional route is they would have to contact a real estate school. They would pay anywhere from $500 to even upwards of $1,000 to attend to tuition for the school. KW is kind of flipping that on its side and creating a school that doesn't cost a student anything at all. So for you guys, in order to either build your downline or just come from contribution, invite people to our unbelievable industry, this is going to be something that's going to be available very soon. We're kind of testing it out. One of our sister schools is offering, I think it's the last session that starts in March, and it's an instructor-led session. So if you guys are interested in having a friend or family member or past client or whatever it is get into real estate, this might be an available option for you, for them to take the schooling at free of charge to them and you, of course. And we come from contribution, so they might be your partners or co-workers at some point in the future at KW. And the KW Prep is to really get them Kellerized and to help them become successful. As you guys know, who are new agents, the real estate school doesn't really tell you how to be successful. It just tells you how to get licensed. And what to do on a daily basis is another thing altogether. And that's why we have coaching and classes and so on and so forth. So KW Prep is kind of that first step to get someone who is brand new, newly licensed into that, direction of success. So if you need more information, just let me know. There's the game show that's coming out that's going to be available shortly. Outfront magazine is both a print and digital magazine, so they have all kinds of different things on there. If you're interested, you can use that as a value proposition for clients as well. So send it out to them. Social content calendar. I don't know if you guys know, but in Command, there's so much data like this, all the design updates. And there's a magazine that you can have actually branded to you as well. And there's pre-designed by professional graphic artists. So you can just slap your face and your name and your branding on it and then launch it out for social media posts, Instagram, Facebook, and all that kind of stuff. So if you're ever wondering, like, I don't even know what to put on there, they've already been created. So you can, of course, design your own. You can manipulate this and edit these, or you can just use this and then launch that out too. So super helpful. If you guys aren't already using it, it's completely free. You may as well jump on and use some of that. So some new things, there's going to be some animation. This is going to be also in designs too. I have not seen this as of yet, but I know they're going to be talking more about it at Family Reunion. So make sure that you watch. And then lastly, before we get into our mastermind and our topic today, don't forget, when you guys are making phone calls, that you do check the Telephone Consumer Protection Act to make sure that someone is not on a do not call list. Fortunately, we have not been hit by this, but even though it says, and it seems when you look at it low, 500 to 1500 per violation, it's not that. It's the class actions that are when people group together and they sue you all at once. And on the mainland, there are presently a number of different lawsuits that are going on, some of which are approaching $1 million. Dollars in penalty. So you want to make sure that if you're calling, whether it's a list or or even if it's a lead that had signed up, just double check. Do yourself a favor and just double check that they're not already on a do not call list. And if, of course, if someone asks you to remove them from that list, make sure that you do so right away, because this is potentially going to be an issue coming down the pike. So I'm kind of giving you a forewarning. It's something that you should be taking very seriously. So a couple of things we're going to talk about today. SRPDS, which is Seller Real Property Disclosure Statement, as well as a listing contract. As I mentioned, we're going to fly through it pretty quick on purpose because there's so much content, but it's extremely valuable and it's extremely important for you guys to know. So we'll go through on the SRPDS is what we're going to start with first. So if you guys have access to an SRPDS, you can pull it up. If you don't, that's fine. I have photos and things on here. Again, this is being recorded. You'll get all the slides, you'll get all the content and resources. There are a ton of questions. It's 5 pages, the SRPDS. There are some questions I think that are pretty self-explanatory, but there are also some that I don't think that sellers know how to answer. And to be honest with you, I don't think agents know how to answer either. So our goal is to get you a better understanding of what to do and how to present that and so forth. And anything that we do, especially these classes that Tony and I put together, these are more of the contract classes, the legal classes and so forth. You guys should be taking notes. I mean, you're licensees and you're professionals, and take notes on anything and everything just to try to grow and be better. I mean, I teach the purchase contract class probably a few times a year, and you couldn't take it enough because it changes. Every time that Tony and I do it, we're adding either new content to it or new scenarios that we've just learned because of either complaints or issues or things that we're dealing with on our end. So even though you've taken it 4 or 5 times, trust me when I say that you can always learn something new, and same thing with these kind of classes too. So please continue taking notes. So here's a little quiz. You guys can come off mic if you want. So true or false, we'll just, and there's no monetary prize or anything. There's no judgment, but first one is true or false. A material fact is anything that has a monetary value or impact of $5,000 or greater. What do you guys think? True or false?
False.
False.
Yeah, that's correct. Absolutely. A material fact is anything that can impact someone's ability or desire to purchase a property. It has nothing to do with a specific dollar amount. Number 2, sellers are not allowed to have any assistance or advice in the preparation of their SRPDS.
False.
That's it, just one person. Yeah, it depends, right? It's supposed to be the seller's supposed to complete it, but does that mean that they can't ask for assistance? It depends. I mean, who are they asking assistance from? Is it from an attorney? Because certainly everyone has a right to legal counsel. So it gets a little tricky. We'll dive into some of those scenarios deeper as well. Number 3, out-of-state sellers or in-state sellers who have never visited the property do not have to provide buyers with an SRPDS.
False.
False.
That's right. Number 4, events such as homicide or burglary do not affect physical structure of the property. Therefore, these events are not material facts and do not have to be disclosed.
False. Wow.
This one is very tricky. It says that if you look at page 1 of the SRPDS, it specifically notes that it goes into detail that that's not something that has to be disclosed. But we're going to get into a scenario too, where in my opinion, and I think Tony will agree, and Tony, you can chime in anytime you want, but disclose, over disclose even, because the last thing that you want is for someone to say that because you didn't disclose something that's kind of big, that's kind of a major thing like that, that they're bringing forth a lawsuit or some damages or anything like that at all. So that's something to be very cautious of. So sometimes, yes, the instructions say that, but you can't be sued for what you disclose, but you can for what you don't. And that's a good thing to operate with as far as how you look at the disclosure and the SRPDS in whole. Number 5, as a good act or as an act of good customer service, the agent should always complete the SRPDS for the seller with the seller's direction.
False.
That false came from, it sounded like a law school false. Was that a law school false?
Yes, that's Robert.
Yes, I know. Yes, absolutely. So, and the whole theme of this is the reason why I wanted to put this class together is because, unfortunately, not so much from KW agents, thankfully, but I see this a lot outside is an agent that you might be in escrow with will go, oh yeah, I filled out the SRPDS for the client, for the seller, here it is. And I'm like, wait, you filled what are you talking about? Like, I think that agents don't understand the impact of what that SRPDS is. And it's not a request, it's required. It's required by law, by statute. So it is absolutely supposed to be completed entirely by the seller and no one else. And is there exceptions to that? Sure. And we'll talk about some of those. So good job on that. So this is coming from National Association of Certified Home Inspectors. Top 10 most common home defects: foundation issues. I've had many experiences with that. Electrical defects, roof problems, heating combustion problems. We don't have that often here. Improperly done owner repairs. Absolutely. That happens here. Structural damage. Yep. Plumbing problems, infiltration by water or air, inadequate ventilation of attic or crawl space, and construction defects. So knowing these kind of things, we're not trying to train you to be home inspectors or to understand construction, but you should understand the basics of what's going on out there, but also the things that are most commonly commonly come up for lawsuits and what have you, especially so you can remind the seller. In my experience, when you have a seller disclosure, I'm saying 99.9%, maybe even 100% of the time, there's something that shows up on the home inspection report that doesn't show up on the seller disclosure, right? I mean, and it's not even a length of time that you own the property, because in my experience, the longer that a seller owns the property, the more things they forget about. Like if they've owned the property for 30 years, if they forgot that 25 years ago, they may have had like a leak here, because they in their minds, they've already fixed it. They've already addressed that issue. That is no longer a problem that shows up. But do they have to disclose that? They should disclose anything and everything. And so when a seller fills out that SRPDS to the best of their ability and they hand it over to you, ideally speaking, and you, for those that I BIC for, you'll see me push back when on I-1B, where it says the initial disclosure is provided by the seller to the buyer by a certain amount of time. If you guys put on there 7 days or 10 days, the reason why I push back and I say change it to 2 or 3 days is because in an ideal world, you want that SRPDS so that you can review it, so that you can give it to your buyer to review. And hopefully you can ask questions in the interim. Like if it says on here, had a roof replaced, but it didn't really give more information, it gives you enough time to go back to the seller and say, well, when did you have it replaced? Was it done by a licensed contractor or roofer? Is there a warranty that's transferable? Like it gives you some time to ask questions. And then when you have all those questions answered, you can then kind of make notes on this SRPDS and then provide it to the home inspector. So the home inspector has enough time to look at everything. So that's why I push back on those issues. And these are the kind of things that if you're working with the seller to remind them of, these are the things that typically come up. Have you ever had a roof issue? Have you had this replaced? And when you're doing your visual inspection, walking through the property, you should be pointing certain things out. Hey, I've noticed there's a watermark on the ceiling. Is that old? Is that new? What happened? Cracks in a foundation. Are you aware of this? Is this something that's old, that's new? Have you had that remedied? Whatever the things is, you should be doing visual inspections to ask them specifically about those things. Consequences when a home seller doesn't disclose. So if a court decides in favor of the buyer, you may be responsible for paying for repairs and other damages resulting from undisclosed defects, paying for the buyer's attorney's fees and costs, in rare circumstances, actually taking the home back, which is crazy. And of course, punitive damages too. So you have to disclose. 3 out of 10 real estate professionals will be sued during their career. That's unfortunate. And knock on wood, I've never been sued. I've been doing this for 22 years and going on 22 years. And I think a lot of this can be absolutely avoided, by doing the right thing, by documenting conversations. You guys have heard me say this before too, but I was just telling an agent this morning, is we're not in the business of dictating and telling clients what to do. Our job is to educate, to warn, and then wait for instruction. And in doing so, that entire communication process has to be documented. So if we're coming up with the SRPDS coming to conclusion and expiring, and we represent the buyer, the conversation that we should have with the buyer should be, hey, how did you want to proceed now that you have a copy of the home inspection report and the Srpds? Do you have any questions or concerns? Let me know if you want to move forward. They might have some additional questions, but once they give you the instruction to move forward, you should document that. Per our instruction, we discussed today that what the findings of the home inspection were, and compared to the Srpds, and you've given me instruction to move forward. So we've educated, we've warned, we've waited for instructions, and then we've documented those instructions. A lot of these lawsuits that this is referencing is as a result of us not doing our job and being detailed. And some of you have heard me say this before too, but I really think that our industry does a disservice to us by calling us real estate salespeople. We're fiduciaries and we're advocates, and I really believe that 15% of what we do is salesmanship, but 85% is being an advocate and having the fiduciary responsibility to protect our clients. So that needs to come to the surface and rise above that. And doing that the right way would eliminate these kind of pitfalls. 85% of all claims arise out of allegations that parties failed to inspect the property or disclose material facts. Agents or parties shall disclose all facts that may affect the value or desirability of the property. So E&O claims, E&O stands for errors and omissions for agents that are new or don't know what that means. It's kind of like our version of malpractice. More than 75% of all E&O claims involve failure to disclose. That's huge. I mean, that's unbelievable. And of that 75%, 90% of the time, the agent broker did not have that information. The plaintiff's lawyer will argue, and most likely win, that the agent or broker should have known about the material fact, property condition, neighborhood, etc. So that goes back to what I'd mentioned before. I've spoken to agents before when I was on the buy side and asked them about the property before either going on a showing or before submitting an offer. And I'm always surprised by their response. If it's, I don't know, I've never been to the property before. Let me call the seller. I don't know how that's possible. You have to go to the property. That's part of our job. I mean, if you're a physician and you're writing prescriptions without having an initial consultation, it's kind of this same, it's along those same lines of being that egregious. So we just have to make sure that we're looking at everything. It's really important. Some examples of E&O claims is misrepresentation, which could be coming from zoning, square footage, condition. By the way, that's also why on listings, we always tell you, and on the purchase contract as well, for the description of the property, not to put zoning, not to put square footage in there as well. Because if you're doing that and you're basing it off of what you find on MLS, they meaning the listing agent, could be getting that from the previous listing. They may not be getting it from public record. So we don't want we want to make sure that the buyer does their proper due diligence and gets the zoning and square footage from the proper sources. And that is what escrow is for. Escrow is a long process for the buyer to do due diligence and to verify certain things. So we want that process to play out. We don't want to unnecessarily put information that could come and bite us later. Failure to maintain the property is a big one. Breach of contract and alleged negligence. When in doubt, you've heard me say this just a few minutes ago, when in doubt, disclose. You can't be sued for what you disclose, but you can be sued for what you don't. That's super important. Literally, please live by that. If nothing else, that's going to save you a bunch. Litigation is expensive. You can spend upwards of hundreds of thousands defending a failure to disclose lawsuit. It's not worth it. So here's a tip. If you represent the seller, do not fill out the disclosure for them, nor provide them with the answers on what to fill out. You can, however, provide them with the resources on how to complete this document, and I will give you the resources and the tips and all that kind of stuff for all the tricky questions that people get stumped on. Tip number 2, conduct a careful visual inspection of each property. Ask questions of the owners if you suspect a potential issue or problem. The problem you ignore or gloss over will be the one that comes back to haunt you for sure. Tip number 3, this is something that I always do for sellers, is in your listing presentation, especially when you hand them the seller disclosure, is recommend that they get a pre-listing inspection done. And a pre-listing inspection, for those who don't know, is the same thing that a buyer would get, the home inspection. and it's done by the same kind of individual for that matter. It could be your home inspector that you go to for home inspections, but he's doing it for the seller. And the purpose of that is when the seller fills out the Srpds, you can put that pre-listing inspection along with it. So basically that's you over disclosing, and especially the fact that you're hiring some other, another party that's an expert in that area to look into that so that you can disclose that, really goes far in over disclosing if should anything kind of go, sideways and the other party accuses the seller and you of not disclosing material fact. And what I would recommend, just as I'd mentioned before, is if you build this into your cadence and into your scripting, that, hey, seller, I highly recommend a pre-listing inspection, and here's the reason why. So what you've done is you're educating in your warning, and you're waiting for instruction. A lot of times sellers will say, you know what, it's too expensive. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to incur that kind of expense, because a lot of times people measure whether they should sell a home, and if they're successful in selling a home, by the mere fact of how many days it takes to sell and how much they got for it. And that's part of it. That's absolutely part of it. But there's a whole other part that happens here, which is the other part is the statute of limitations that follows a seller disclosure. Or if something goes sideways and a suit comes up, 12 to 18 months after you close. Those are things to keep in mind. So if you've suggested to the seller, hey, I think that you should get a pre-listing inspection along with filling out this Srpds so that we can provide it to the other side, then this is to avoid any issues that could follow you later. And they say, no, it's too expensive. I think we're okay. Say, no problem. I just want to make sure I warn you. And then what do? You document it. You email them. Per our conversation, I suggested you get a pre-listing inspection. You've instructed me not to and to proceed forward without it. And that way, if it comes back to, as an issue, you've warned them and you have that documented. You don't need them to sign anything. They don't need to respond with anything. You're just documenting all the instructions that you're being given. Because we, as licensees, we do have the duty of instruction. Never suggest to a buyer to avoid having a home inspection. So if you're on the buy side, never suggest that. I see it all the time, especially in a competitive market that we're in now. And there's language that you should use if a buyer is instructing you not to have a home inspection. First of all, our KW standard addendum suggests that they do have one, and there's language that I would want you to insert into section Q of the contract to kind of indemnify you, us, and further suggest to the buyer that they've been advised that they should have that, even though they're giving us instructions to remove it. And then, of course, should they decide against a pre-listing inspection, have them sign off that, which is the email that I'd mentioned before, that you've suggested it to them and they've declined. Number 4, generally the outcome of a lawsuit comes down to one person's word against another. So if the agent has documentation written at the time of the event, and that agent will be better able to support their defense. So Chemostone, he always says this: if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. He randomly audits a lot of his clients. If you guys don't know him, he's a real estate attorney. He teaches a bunch of classes for us. He's really great, super knowledgeable individual. And a lot of times he and I will talk, and he's mentioned many times that he's randomly audited files for some of his clients to go through and see, how badly some of them are. And he said almost in every case, there's something that you can be sued for. So imagine you have a client that you're like, everything went well. Like the transaction was super smooth. Clients love me, no issues, no pushback, nothing whatsoever. You close, you get paid. In your mind, you're basing that entire transaction on everything was great. I got paid and it was a wonderful transaction. But a Chemostone, who is a real estate attorney who's looking for holes in that entire process, can find something that you could be sued for. I mean, and I say that to kind of be a little bit scary, because that just goes to show how litigious not only this industry is, but how many holes that we are obligated as licensees to try to fill, so that we're not exposing ourselves to be sued later on. I've said this before too, but all of us are licensees, and that license is not a college degree that you want to put, behind your desk in a gaudy frame. That license is appointed to you from the state so that they know where to find you, so that they can so the public can serve you papers and sue you. So knowing that, we got to take that, very seriously, and take our license seriously. So getting started, this is page 1. the top circle, this is the portion that can be completed by the agent from information obtained from either the prelim or from tax records or some other form of public records. That's where you as the listing agent can pre-complete some of that data to be helpful for your seller. But if you see right there in the middle of the page, and Tony was on the forms committee, and probably Tony can chime in too, but when the forms committee does things like have a sentence that stands on its own, or all caps, or bold, or even underlining, they're doing that on purpose. That's not aesthetic. That's literally trying to tell you it must be completed by the seller only. So that answers some of the question of that quiz in the beginning. Got to be completed by the seller. The purpose of a disclosure statement. So per HRS Chapter 508D, for residential real property, a seller of residential real property is obligated to fully and accurately disclose in writing to a buyer all material facts concerning the property. And a material fact, this is actually the definitions on page 1 that we were just on to, is defined as any fact, defect, or condition, past or present, that would be expected to measurably affect the value to a reasonable person of the residential real property being offered for sale. So the tricky thing is there's a little bit of subjectivity. That's why I always say over disclose, because it measurably affect the value of a reasonable person. That's a little subjective depending on the person that's looking at that. So you can absolutely cover yourself if you just over disclose. The SRPDS is a total of 5 pages. So the first one is just more or less instructions. So we'll go over the tricky questions from pages 2, 3, 4, and 5 in it. And they just revised this, by the way, guys. So if you're not using the most current version, which was updated in November of 2021, make sure that you start using that. The SRPDS is valid. So if the sellers fill it out, it's valid for up to 6 months. And of course, if there's changes on that or new found information that it needs to be amended in an amended SRPDS. A couple of suggestions that I would make. If you're representing the seller, have the seller complete this in full, have you review it in full to make sure that you don't have any questions or concerns, or that there's not portions or questions that's completely skipped over. Make sure that you have that in hand prior to going live on the MLS. And in fact, one step further would be to take that document, that SRPDS, when it's fully complete, and put it in the supplements section of the MLS. So it's available for potential buyers agents to download and take a look at. I told that to an agent a while ago, and the response that I got was, "Why would I do that? That could hurt my deal. That could hurt them wanting to write an offer." I disagree wholeheartedly with that thought process. I'd rather someone see the SRPDS and not write an offer, because they're going to cancel an escrow anyways. And now you got to deal with an escrow canceling and then remarketing it all over again. And then people asking, well, why did it fall out of escrow? And that whole thing. I'd rather not even have an offer and go into escrow because of something that shows up on the SRPDS, because it's not as though you can skip that process. The SRPDS is a contingency. So I'd rather get that out of the way up front. So my recommendation is definitely to do that. Tip number 5, not to my knowledge, you guys, as you see on here, there's 4 different columns. Yes, no, not to my knowledge, and NA, which is not applicable. Not to my knowledge and or NA are not legal defenses against answering those questions. So have you guys ever received an SRPDS, whether from your seller and you represent the seller, or when you're on the buy side, and everything down the list always it says not to my knowledge or NA? That's not necessarily a good thing, right? So it depends on, of course there might be a question or two that's applicable, but if it's a theme, like that's how they're going about answering those questions, that's a problem. So you're going to need to dig a little bit further. Okay. So let me check the chat real quick and see if there's any questions. Hold on. Isabella, I asked all my sellers to not handwrite into section G, but instead type the list of explanations and add it as an appendix. Yeah, that's fine too. We have a digital version too, and there's pros and cons to that. I always give people the first one, and I tell them it's a draft. Like, here you go. Here's the full seller disclosure. Mark it up, highlight things, circle things, whatever you want. Kind of get your footing and your bearings on what information that you know and what you may not know. And then for a cleaner version, I usually email them the PDF that's fillable, and then they can sign it and add the details to it as well. Another tip too, before we get started on these questions, is in the purchase contract. Tony, you got to help me. I got to think about this for a second. I think it's section I4B. Is there's a portion where if the buyer finds something, like by way of the home inspection or what have you, there's an additional time frame for the amended disclosure. And as I mentioned before, in my experience, there's always things to potentially amend. If you're a listing agent, I would always suggest attending the home inspection. And I don't mean attending the home inspection in a intrusive way where your hand is around the buyer and you're following the buyer and the buyer's agent around to not that, but prior to the buyer doing their summary or their debrief with the home inspector, you're kind of taking notes. And trust me, they're salesmen too, the home inspectors. They want to earn your business as well. So they're typically very friendly. So you go there before the buyer's agent and the buyer arrive, and you can just, be like, hey, anything to note, any issues? And I've never seen a situation where they weren't happy to go, oh yeah, so there's a leak here and there's this here, and they're kind of giving you all that information. That information is super helpful because you can then take that information and update with an amended SRPDS and issue that, not you personally, but through the seller, and issue that to the buyer's agent so that it closes the gap on when they're able to cancel, because you're immediately giving that information to them the very moment of the home inspection or the next day, versus then, you ever have a situation when you're on the list side and the buyer's agent goes, hey, can you amend the SRPS and include this, and the other thing? And 50% of the time, they just want that because they're super detailed. The other 50%, they're trying to find a reason to cancel. They're trying to extend that window out. So this is your ability to kind of close that gap a little bit. So we're going to go through a couple of questions. Again, these are the questions we're going to focus on, are the ones that I get asked a lot by you guys, by the agents. And so this hopefully will add some clarification. So is the property subject to CC&Rs? CC&Rs are covenants, conditions, and restrictions. So if you're in a townhome or condo, absolutely, there's always CC&Rs on that. That's basically the rules passed forth by the association. But also, you could be in a single family home and have CC&Rs. On Oahu, you could be in Mililani area and have the community CC&Rs and association. You could be in Ocean Point or Hawakale, where it's a single family home, and quite frankly, some of them being expensive ones too, but they're still subject to CC&Rs. So that's what that's referring to and asking. If you have a client or a seller that's asking you that, hey, I don't even know how to answer that. What is a CC&R? You just ask them, you got to ask them a series of questions to help them self-discover without telling them the answer. So you don't want to go, yeah, you're in a CC&R. What you'd rather say is, well, the CC&Rs are basically covenants, conditions, and restrictions, basically an association. Do you have an association? Oh yeah, I have an association. Okay. I mean, that you're asking them the question so that they can get to the answer themselves.
Hey, Chad.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, one more thing is that, a lot of the leasehold property that was converted to fee simple throughout the years, they had a number of CC&Rs in there as well. So if you've got a property that's in Pearl Ridge, Waikai, Kailua, Kaneohe, there are some CC&Rs attached to that run with the land. Great
point. Thank you, Tony. The other one is the proper, secondary one is 1A. Are there any violations of the CC&Rs? So some of this seems kind of obvious. If you're in a condo or townhome, you may have like that, yellow or pink or red sticky notice that's on the door that says, hey, whatever the violation might be. But it's important for you to ask the seller this as well. Even if they've answered no, I would still ask a question and kind of give them that example. The reason is you don't want the buyer to purchase a property, close, and walk into a huge stack of violations. I'll give you an example that happened to me a few years ago, which is I represented a buyer, and the buyer wanted to buy in a building in town. And one of the main requirements of purchasing was they needed to have an AC unit. They didn't care if it was central or if it were a window unit or whatever. This one happened to be a window unit. And coincidentally, there was a few properties available for sale in this building, but this unit was the only one that had window units in all the rooms. So she was super excited. wanted to make an offer. I called the listing agent, asked if there's any issues and violations, also asked if there's any like outstanding permit issues or what have you. And she said, no, not at all. I then called the HOA to ask the same thing, found out in making those calls that the building does not allow window ACs at all. So the fact that it had it, even the listing agent assumed that it was fine. It's not that she was covering anything up. She just assumed like it's good, it's fine, because everyone else, or not everyone, but I would say 20 to 25% of the building had it. So this must be fine. It wasn't fine. It wasn't even allowed at all. So imagine you close on a transaction and one of the requirements that your buyer gave you was to purchase something that had AC in it, and you close and suddenly, there's a issue and a violation that that there's these window units are not even allowed to begin with. So it really, you have to dig a little bit and do some research to protect your client. Number 4, again, I'm skipping, I'm not going in order, is the property located in a special management area? This one I get asked a lot. People just, I see more, not to my knowledge, or NA, which is fine if that's applicable, but you'd rather give the actual resource. So what does that even mean? An SMA permit was established in 1975 with the enhancement of Act 176, known as the Shoreline Protection Act. And here's the bottom line is what I do, what Tony does as well. We pull up the information for them based on the property address and so forth, and we just provide that information. So we're still not giving them the yes or no. We're providing them the information. So there's a map right there. I don't expect you to do a screenshot or save it. We're going to send this out to you guys so you can use it. But when you are taking a listing, be a professional, provide all this information to them to make it so much easier for your client to know this. And if you do it the right way, this is something I take pride in too, is when I deal with a client, almost every single one of my clients will walk away going, oh my God, I feel like I took a class in real estate. And that's what I want, because I'm teaching them things that they wouldn't otherwise know. And if you're dealing with just an average agent out there, they're not going to know this or explain this in this kind of detail as well. And it is really important because they could get sued if they answer the wrong way. 4A, if it's oceanfront property, are there any past and existing state shoreline certifications? So what does that mean? Same thing. A shoreline certification is required for purposes of implementing shoreline setback laws and other related laws. So there's a certification that goes along with that. And Tony inserted this question too, which is, what's the difference between oceanfront and beachfront? Pretty obvious. Oceanfront could be off of a rise or a cliff or what have you, whereas beachfront is there's sand right in front of that too. So number 5, is a property located in a tsunami evacuation zone? People jump to the conclusion of, oh no, I can't be because I'm over here or over there. It's not a guess. It shouldn't be kind of a gut feeling kind of thing. Simply use the map. There's a tool for that.
Hey, Chad, can I ask you a question? I can't find my raise hand button here. All these questions, since you say, Tony's on the forms committee, and maybe we can suggest it when they do change forms or whatnot. All these questions that realtors have access to and know, at the beginning where it says to be filled out by realtors only, and then and the other part is to be filled out by sellers. Could some of these questions be done by the assistance of the realtor, or the realtor does it because they have the access to it? And not all sellers have this or know where to find it,
I wouldn't, just my opinion, I would not recommend you as an agent, your assistant or your staff or admin kind of pre-complete some of this, because you're going to walk into you're going to step in that same pothole of, if that information is wrong, or, hey, my agent told me that to fill this out this way. And that's literally what most sellers are going to do. If something goes sideways and you're looking at a form, they're going to go, I don't even remember filling this form out, or whatever it is, or my agent told me to fill this out. But rather, if you're providing them the sources. So when I say providing them the sources, you could absolutely put in that map. Let me go there. So if you go, this is a copy or a screenshot of that map. So if you went to that website, put in that information, it's going to tell you where that's where the zone is. And it'll tell you if that particular property is in that zone. So again, you're not answering yes or no, but you can provide them, here it is. Is this your address? That's here. I put that in there. So here's what it says. And then they can decipher that on their own. You're not telling them what to fill out, but you're providing them all the guidance and resources on how to fill it out.
Okay, thanks.
That's a good question. Is the property subject to air pollution? These are things like VOG, for instance, and this is a little bit subjective. So this one is a matter of asking them: are you sensitive to VOG, or is there air pollution that you're aware of? Because it could be near the airport, and they are sensitive to the smell of jet fuel or diesel fuel. It could be in an area that they experience VOG. Personally, I'm not sensitive to any of that. So when people go, "Oh my gosh, the VOG is heavy today," I don't even know what they're talking about. Like I've never even experienced that ever, but that's okay. It's still something that you want to disclose if in fact that seller experiences that themselves. Number 8, is the property located in a geothermal subzone or near a geothermal facility? I get this one asked all the time, that no one knows even know how to respond to that. Well, there are no geothermal subzones on Oahu. Currently, there is one on the Big Island in Puna, but the same thing as well. You can pull up this map and kind of show them, well, you're located here on Kauai or on Oahu, and the geothermal facilities on the Big Island. And they can obviously they're going to know how to answer it at that point. Number 9, is a property located in regular path of aircraft, and does it experience regular excessive aircraft noise? Again, this one's a little bit subjective too, but super important, because if you're in Eva Beach, you're under the path of commercial aircraft. So the answer likely is going to be yes, but you don't want to, again, answer that for them. You can just tell them, I think that goes past Eva Beach. And sometimes people get a little bit muted to sounds that they've experienced over and over and over again for years, right? So you might have to remind them, from someone who has a fresh perspective and not used to the area and the sounds, is this something that you hear? Again, a little subjective, but that's something that's really important. There's been lawsuits about sounds, and we'll get to that. There's a slide coming up for that. Is a property located within the boundaries of the air installation compatibility use zone? Same thing. There is a decibel rating near military installations, and there is a website that you can put the address in, and it'll tell you exactly if you're in that zone or not. Is the property located in FEMA's flood insurance rate maps? Have you guys ever seen firm, pre-firm, post-firm, firm? That's talking about the flood insurance rate map specifically. And what does it mean? That's the web address. You just pop that in there, and it tells you what zone they're in, if they're affected by it. Does a property have a pre-flood insurance rate map structure built? So what does that mean? It compares the date of construction or substantial improvement to the effective date of the flood insurance rate map. So the pre-firm is structures that are completed prior to that issuance, and post-firm means that structures that are completed afterwards. So as a simple illustration, that pre-firm or post-firm, because that's one of the questions, and it even gives the dates of the county. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Is there an elevation certificate? Have you guys ever seen on Oahu anyways, properties that are like in Waianae or Hauula area where that it's on stilts? It's on stilts to try to have that, well, hopefully there's an elevation certificate, but it's elevated on purpose to be higher than the mean high tide, which will then reduce the cost of the flood insurance. There's some properties, some older properties that are in those flood zones, those heavy flood zones or the high risk flood zones that are on the ground. They're not on stilts at all. And you'd be surprised on the annual cost of flood insurance for those properties. It's so high. And so to avoid or minimize or reduce that cost, you can have an elevation certificate or raise that up on stilts if it's new construction and so forth. Here's a tip for you though. If you are dealing with a property that does have an elevation certificate or needs one, and you're doing a survey anyways, so this is when you're on the list side or even on the buy side, make sure that you request from that surveyor that they do the elevation certificate as well. Most surveyors are licensed to do elevation certs at the same time. A lot of times people forget that the elevation certificate is needed because it usually comes up in the conditional loan approval from the lender. So that's all the way towards the end. So you already have the survey, you're kind of moving everything along, you think everything's going fine. And the lender goes, oh, by the way, we need an elevation certificate. And if you do, you know how long it takes to get a survey already? Then you got to call that surveyor again and go, by the way, can you go back out and do an elevation? You might as well ask that guy for two things, a survey and an elevation cert at the same time. So make sure that you know that.
Hey, Chad.
Sure. Yes.
If someone is selling oceanfront or beachfront property and they're doing a survey, they can order the certificate to determine the I just drew a blank. To certify the shoreline, for building permit purposes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. That's a great tip. Are there any roadways, driveways, walls, fences, and or other improvements which are shared with adjoining landowners? Not only is this important to know if you're on the buy side, so this SRPDS is we're talking in kind of the framework of how you're finding some of this information for your seller. But buyer's agents, keep this in mind too. These are like hot topic red flags, how to look into this a little bit further for when you're protecting your buyer, because you got to be looking at this kind of stuff too. So why is this an issue? So this is a little map. I have a bigger one here, but this is kind of a bit blown up. So just an example, what if you have a property that has a shared driveway and 3 different properties share it? So the question that's going to come up that you should be asking yourself, whether you're on the buy side or sell side, is who owns the driveway? Is it one property that owns a driveway that provides an easement to the other ones? By the way, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just information that we need to know and then need to disclose. Or is it 3 properties all equally have rights and share that driveway? And if so, what the next question would be, is there a roadway or driveway maintenance agreement? That's something the lender is going to ask you. And the purpose of that would be, what happens if the sewer line that runs underneath that driveway breaks and they need to, get construction crews out there to pull it up and redo it or fix it or whatever it is, and to the tune of $60,000. The question then becomes, everything is fine, right? Oh yeah, shared driveway, no problem at all. I'll wave to my neighbors as I pull into everything's perfect until there's a $60,000 bill. And now all 3 of them are fighting, like who's paying what. So that's what the importance of asking that question is, because the next question should be, is there a driveway maintenance agreement? Who's responsible for the repairs and the maintenance and so forth? So don't take those kind of things lightly. That's very, very important. Are there any non-conforming uses or unpermitted structures on the property? So what does that mean? I'll give you an example. I had a client once that in the Kalihi area, they sold a property that had 4 units on it, and the square foot of the lot was only 7,000. That's too small a lot to have 4 units in today's standards, today's building code and permit standards. But it was built. It was grandfathered in because it met the standards at that time that it was built. It was built in the 40s. So that's an example of non-conforming use. So it doesn't conform with today's building codes, and they're grandfathered in. The downside with having a non-conforming property is not that it will, but it could cause some marketability issues going forward. Meaning, if this property wasn't in great condition, it was just okay condition. But if the property were ever to catch on fire and burn down, or you had to destroy it to renovate it or whatever, the county would not allow you to build what was there already, because that was non-conforming to today's standards. So that's the issue. So they would only allow you to rebuild to the current standards. Unpermitted is pretty self-explanatory. That happens all the time, especially here in this state. There's a lot of unpermitted additions or unpermitted improvements. That one's pretty self-explanatory, but it's really, really important to know. The reason why that plays out, the unpermitted thing plays out in value, is if someone has a loan or getting financed, especially if you're adding square footage or adding rooms or something to that effect, an appraisal for the purpose of lending for the buyer is only going to give value credit to what is permitted, not what's not. So know that. That's a super, super important thing to understand when you're trying to determine what to offer or what to list at, depending on who you're representing. So that's unpermitted structures. But by the way, an unpermitted structure could also be like a carport or something like that as well. So it doesn't necessarily add value, but the structure itself is unpermitted. It still needs to be disclosed. Is the property exposed to other types of recurring excessive noise? So as I was mentioning before, there's actually a lawsuit. Have you guys ever seen where it says on there in some of the fine print in parentheses there that it asks about excessive noise, and it gives an example like coqui frogs? There was a whole lawsuit about it, which is referenced right there. So what that lawsuit stated basically was the buyers purchased this property. I don't know if it was sight unseen. I don't remember the details of it, but they purchased this property. The sellers didn't disclose all these coqui frog sounds, and and there was a lawsuit that came about, and they said, hey, we were so used to it, we didn't even realize it. So it's really, really important to if they're in an area that mopeds, drive by at night at all hours, like disclose it. You absolutely disclose anything and everything that you possibly can. Make sure that you advise the sellers to do that. Is there any filled land on the property? So what does that mean? There was a large builder out in Waianae a few years ago that purchased a bunch of soil and land, and they used it to fill when they were developing their communities. Well, fast forward, that soil and dirt was contaminated with certain pesticides. So when they had their disclosure, they had to disclose that issue. So when people think filled land, I don't know what they measure that by, but it could even be like I bought outside soil. And the real question is, from public safety, is there any contaminants in it? Where did you get it from? Is there pesticides in it, and so forth? So that's the question that they're trying to get to when they're asking, is there any filled land on the property? Number 31, were additions, modifications, and or alterations made to the property without obtaining required approvals? So that goes to, like we were talking about before, whether it's a townhome or a condo, that means through the association. If that's a single family, that means through the DPP. Does any other party have any unrecorded interest in the property? What does that mean? Remember, that question was, I think, number 1 or 2 in the previous iteration. Now it's back at number 32. So what does that mean? It could mean borrowing money for the down payment. It could be that some of the money was obligated as an unofficial lien on the property, otherwise called a silent second. That doesn't happen too often. It depends on the market, but as things may move over to a buyer's market again, you'll see those kind of things pop up from time to time. A silent second. It could be a beneficiary in a trust that's not a trustee. So that's what they're referring to when they say, does any other party have an unrecorded interest in the property? Is membership mandatory? That's referring to the associations. And the answer to that is, as far as I know, on Oahu at least, everything is mandatory. You can't opt out of an association membership. The property in and of itself is, again, me saying that I don't know any property that it's an elective doesn't mean you should answer that question. But just so you guys know, if they've answered no, you're going to want to ask more questions as to why and how they're arriving at that conclusion, because I'm not aware of anything that is elective. Number 4 is duplicated twice on the association side and then the condo specific side, which is if you're aware of any future maintenance fee increases, special assessments, and so forth. This one's obviously important. You guys looked to this. This comes up again in the RO 105C, which is the lender portion of the condo docs. So that's pretty self-explanatory. But if you see a conflict, you see yes on one and no on the other, that's obviously something to dig further to. 8A, if the units include parking, is it deeded with the unit? Most parking is not deeded. There are some, but most of them are not. So you want to, the reason why that's important too is the association typically has parking as a common area in most cases. And the reason why that's important to know, or to at least separate that out, is there are some people that are superstitious, or they buy a unit because the parking is located by the wall and no one else, or whatever the thing is. They're kind of buying that whole package. But if it's a common area or a common element and you're saying that it's deeded, that it runs with that property, the association in that case could either swap numbers. And if someone's superstitious, they're like, oh my gosh, you have number 23 and my favorite number is 24, or whatever the thing is, they could get upset about that, or they could move the space because it's owned by the association. It's not deeded to the actual unit. So you got to make sure that if it is or isn't. 8B, are there any issues or special arrangements with the parking stall? This could be things as simple as, yes, you can't park in certain areas past 10 o'clock at night or you're going to get towed. Or I have 3 spaces, but one of the 3 spaces I rent to my other neighbor at this other unit, or something like that. That's what they're referring to. Or it's a tandem parking, which there's a few buildings that have tandem parking. And we have assignments where these days I park in the front and the other days I park in the back. Whatever that is, that should be addressed there, because that could change the desirability from a buyer, right? Depending on those kind of things. Do any improvements, additions, structural modifications, or alterations exist at the property without required building permits, association, design committee, or other government approvals? This kind of goes into like that whole example that I gave before about the air conditioning. Has there been any evidence or presence of mold, mildew, fungus, interior, exterior? So when people ask me that question on sellers, this is the first thing I say. I go, hey, have you ever like on the back of your shower curtain had like surface mold that pops up? And almost always they're like, oh yeah. Or under the sink, or maybe outside by the hose spigot, there's like a little bit of surface mildew or mold. Like, oh yeah. I'm like, yeah. You know what I mean? The answer to that, I don't know how it would always be a definitive no, because I think what sometimes people think of is the extreme, which obviously you want to disclose as well, which is the safety related black mold and that sort of thing. But surface mold and those kind of things, you should absolutely disclose that too. But you're just going to differentiate that and explain that in detail, which we'll get to in a slide or two. Same thing here. Has there ever been any evidence of pest infestation? We're in the tropics, right? We're in a tropical island. So I'll go, have you ever seen a cockroach in your house? Oh yeah, I've seen like 3. Yeah. So, I mean, is that an infestation? Probably not, but I would document that nonetheless. And so as you guys see here, I think that's the last of this section. So you see that little section G where it has all those blank lines, and then you can continue on forward with adding another page on there too. Anything that was answered yes, whether even if it's as simple as this, number 10 here, has there ever been evidence of pest infestation? You can, the seller can write on there number 10 and then address that issue. I've only seen a handful of roaches and a couple of ants and I have regular treatment through Terminex, or handful of roaches. I killed them with a slipper and that's it. Or I sprayed them with bug spray, and whatever the thing is, at least you're addressing that issue. Because what you don't want is someone to say, I'm sensitive to bugs, and they didn't disclose that there's a full bug problem. And maybe they're not aware of a bug problem because they didn't look underneath certain things. And if and the buyer's coming in doing renovations, that's usually when all the bugs start to come out, when they start pulling cabinets up and countertops and so forth. So it's really important to address. So I'm going to pause for a second, because then I'm going to jump into listings. That's SRPDS. Any questions that you guys have, feel free to come off mute and ask, and Tony and I will be happy to answer for SRPDS. Anyone? Javid said, how do I get all those questions that Chad went over with? I will send you the recording will be available, Javid, as well as the slides. So you'll have that. Average cost. Oh yeah. Thank you, Maria, for answering that. That's right.
I have a question, Chad. So in
Sure.
terms of, what was it? Number 14 on easements or shared driveways or anything like that. Is that all come in the title report if there's any maintenance agreements, or does that come from the seller?
It depends. So the answer is in many cases it is on the prelim. It's on title, especially if it's a recorded encroachment agreement and recorded easement and so forth. But there are other things that might be in place that title and escrow don't even have copies of, or they're not aware of. So like with anything, in a perfect world, it's on both, and we got it covered, and we kind of have over information, but don't assume that it's not the be all end all. So we have to ask, which is why it's kind of separated out like that. Any other questions before we jump into listings? Hey, we're making good time. This is actually faster than I thought. Okay, I'm going to jump into the listing side. In this market, there's a couple of things that I want to go over, which is this. So I've heard this term thrown out before. Please, if you know what this term is, please throw it away, take it out of your brain and just toss it aside. The term pocket listing is not a term that you should be using, or we do, or we have. In the past, in pre technology era, a pocket listing would have been a listing that an agent got. So they would market it to find their own buyer to represent, or maybe a buyer in the firm. And that would be a pocket listing. They're kind of taking that listing and putting it in their pocket, so to speak. That's where that phrase came from. A pocket listing is a violation of NAR's, the National Association of Realtors, Clear Cooperation Rule. So we don't do pocket listings. That's not even a thing. But agents still use it thinking that that's an exempted listing. That is not that. So don't confuse the two, because one is a violation and one is not. What an exempted listing is, and you have to know what this is and how to do this properly, because I see this come up more and more, especially now, is an exempted listing is one where the seller, at the seller's discretion, is asking you as their agent not to put the listing onto the MLS. So why would they do that? What would be some of the reasons? Is one could be, and this is the most common one that I hear anyways, is my friend or my family member is a listing agent or a real estate agent, and I don't want to upset them and see your face and sign out front in my yard. So that's why I'd rather have it not listed on the MLS and have a sign out front. That's one that could be possible. But at the end of the day, we have to, again, going back to educate, warn, and then wait for instruction. We have to educate them too, that if we don't put it on the MLS, that is the easiest way for you guys to maximize exposure on the property, is putting it on the MLS. So if they're avoiding putting it on the MLS, there's got to be a good reason as to why. The MLS, and especially not KW agents, but it's really the smaller boutique firms and agents that get overly paranoid when big firms like us and some of the other big ones too have an abundance of listings and dual agencies and what have you, and they always think that these larger firms are up to some sort of shenanigans, and we're not cooperating with them as other agents. That's what it comes down to. So and I understand where that's coming from, where if you're representing a buyer and you're writing 30 different offers, all of which are being either not responded to or you're getting beat out, and then you look online, you're like, oh, I wrote an offer, one of 30 offers, and they just took their own offer internally. I get it. I understand what they're talking about. So we have to make sure that we follow the rules of an exempted listing and we're not doing a pocket listing. So how do we do that? It's on the listing agreement itself in the additional instructions. If that's what the client is saying, it just says on there, seller instructs listing agent to do an exempted listing and not put the property onto the MLS. And it either could be indefinitely or could be for a specific period of time. Don't kind of freestyle that process. Call me or call your broker and ask, like, we want to know, like, what is it you're trying to accomplish? What are you trying to do? And we'll help walk you through that. The other thing is KW is not a discount brokerage. And I use that term cautiously because that's a term that's thrown around, and discount brokers tend to get a little bit offended by that term. But I mean, it is what it is. We're not a discount firm. We're a full service brokerage that offers service in a lot of different areas in real estate. And what that means is we don't do flat fee. So if you're taking a listing, we don't do flat fee. We don't do anything under 4.5% in total. You have to have my approval on anyways, because again, we're not a discount brokerage. So there could be a very specific reason that I will approve of. Maybe it's a reason like this particular client is giving me 5 transactions already, so I told him I'd give him a deal. Okay, let's talk about that for sure. But if you're a brand new agent and you're giving things away at 3%, 3.5%, there's no way. That's not going to happen. So call me first. I'll walk you through it. I'll help you through it. Also too, and we'll go through it, but a lot of new agents are getting the total commission part. I think it's an A4, I believe. No, A5. The total commission and then the co-op commission, they're getting that part confused. So we're going to go over how to properly separate that out. And then MLS will impose a fine if you don't put the data. This is for High Central MLS. I don't remember what it is for Hawaii information for our Kauai agents, but they'll impose a fine if you don't input the data based on A4 or A10 or an amendment to the listing agreement. So here's what I mean by that. Let's say that you take a listing. The issue, and I just finished my term on the board. I was one of the directors on the board, and some of the things that we kind of argue about is this kind of stuff here. The board, the date that you have for the listing, let's say that you go out to a listing appointment tomorrow. So today is February 8th and tomorrow is February 9th. And you put on there, the listing is going to commence February 9th, 2022 to February 9th, 2023, right? That's kind of standard. You list it for 12 months and that's a time frame. Well, per the MLS rules, if you don't put it on the MLS within 4 days of that, you're now in violation. Well, if you just took the listing and it's dated for tomorrow, it's almost impossible for not only you to have photos back, but have it marketed, to have it kind of ready to go live on the MLS. It's almost impossible to do that. So what the MLS would say is don't put tomorrow's date, February 9th. Instead, put the date that's more realistic, such as March 1st, as an example. And that's fine. Then the other problem becomes, well, are they even bound to you now? Because now it doesn't start till March 9th. So to keep them from having like a wandering eye, that's why I wanted to have them on February 9th to begin with, instead of March 1st. So there's conflicting information that the board would provide in that case. So that's why they rely on A4, which is the dates. And if not, then it's A10, which is the additional information that you can type into, and or an amendment thereafter. So here's what that looks like. Let's say I go to my listing presentation tomorrow. I personally, as an agent, I would want to bind them to me immediately. So I'd list it as February 9th. But I know I'm not ready. So in A10, I might have something in there that says something to the effect of, and by the way, I have templates in zip forms. So when you guys click on my templates, these things are already pre-completed for you. So you don't have to take notes as specific to what to write down. It's already drafted for you. But it would say something to the effect of, the seller authorizes a delayed entry into the MLS, and seller will notify listing agent what date to go live on the MLS, or something to that effect, right? So what you're doing is you're saying, yes, A4 binds the seller to me, but A10 is also noting that I'm not going to be, I can't go live. It's going to be exempted or delayed into the MLS for a certain period of time. And then an amendment, the same amendment that you guys would use for a purchase contract, instead of saying amending the purchase contract, you're going to say amending listing agreement. And that amendment would say, seller authorizes property to go live on the MLS on whatever it is, February 20th or whatever that date is. Now that whole packet together, that listing agreement with that amendment, and then so long as you put it into the MLS 4 days from February 20th in that example, whatever's on the amendment, you're good to go. You have to be super cautious. There's a lot of agents, especially new agents, that get fined for that because they'll put a date in and they don't either put it in the MLS at all, or it's an exempted listing. By the way, when you have an exempted listing, you still have to send that listing agreement to the MLS. So it might not be on the MLS, so no one sees it. It's not on Zillow. It's not on Redfin. It's not on an IDX feed, but you still have to send it to the board. They have to have a copy of it. And if they don't, if someone reports you, like another agent's like, hey, I heard this property is in escrow, but I don't see it on the MLS. I don't see a sign out front. They can report you. If the MLS has your listing agreement that's exempted already, they will tell the other agent, no, it's exempted. Thank you. And then no issues come about. Otherwise, the board itself is going to call you and audit your file and say, hey, we got a complaint that you're listing a property and we don't see any exempted listings. Please send us a copy of your file. And it better be to the T correct, or they're going to fine you. So just know that. Marinda. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Chad.
Hi.
So question is, can you say what you suggested in the template and have it say on or before March 30th? So you're,
sorry.
or do you need to have a certain date in there?
This is just my
question.
This is, yeah. So thank you for asking. That's a great question. I'm going to give you the answer to that along, and this is consistent with any document that we're using, especially the purchase contract too. I hate the term on or before. And here's a reason, is because that doesn't mean in law, that doesn't mean anything. Our state, there are certain states that allow based on performance. So the on or before, the before portion can just be the performance itself. In this state, that's not necessarily applicable. And so I'd rather have the actual date be defined. So on the purchase contract, you guys have seen this, like on or before 45 days from acceptance or whatever. I hate that so much. Just put 45 days and then use an amendment, because both parties have to agree to that before anyways. Same thing with this is on or before March 1st, just put on there. You can put either today's date on there and then put delayed entry, and then that can be closed out using an amendment. It sounds like a lot of work, but that's super definitive. And there's going to be never a question from the board about what you were trying to do if you do it that way. As far as the wording and that goes for the template, just use a template. If you log on to our zip forms, and grab the global template for listings, the wording I've already put in there for you. And again, you know, I'll send it out if you guys have questions afterwards. Same things, take notes as we talked about before. So when you prepare a listing, there's a bunch of things that you're going to want to do. Before you go, I don't know how many agents do this. And if this is you, please change how you're going about doing this. But you should prepare for a listing, like prepare in advance for a listing. First thing is order a prelim, order a preliminary title report, because I've seen this happen more often than not. The person that you're talking to over the phone might not be the person that shows up on title. And if that's the case, you got to make sure that a decision maker or someone that's on title is present during the appointment, or a reason as to why they're not. Like, you know, my husband's deceased or whatever the answer is. And that's why the husband doesn't, he shows up on title, but he's not going to be there in person. That makes sense. But then you can prepare them further. Please make sure that you have a copy of the death certificate or any trust documents if this isn't a trust or what have you. But that will also spark some additional conversation too. I get a lot of, I'm going through a divorce right now, and accepting a listing from a couple that's currently going through divorce. They just updated the law. I want to say 2 years ago. Tony, you can chime in on this one too, but it's a violation. Like, you can't accept a listing when a couple is currently going through divorce without speaking to their attorney or getting a copy of the divorce decree. You got to ask more questions. You can't represent one, because that one that you're representing might be withholding proceeds and funds from the other. So a couple of things you want to pull up is A, the MLS, the previous listing. You're not copying data. You're just seeing the condition of the previous listing. It's super helpful, because if you're listing this and they had just purchased a property just 3 or 4 years before, you can see the condition of the property. If it's highly upgraded now and it was in shambles before, that's good. But then it's gonna provoke you to ask certain questions, right, when you're at the listing presentation. Oh, did you recently had it renovated? It looks beautiful. I love what you did with the place. Did you use a licensed contractor? Do you have permits to do, if it's required for permits of what they did, but did you pull proper permits and so forth? It'll help you get to those questions. Or some of the notes on the listing might help as well, so that you know what you're getting into. Hawaii Information Service or Realist, you have access to both. Realist is free. Hawaii Information Service, we as a company have access to this account. And those on Kauai, I don't mean the MLS. The Hawaii Information Service also has another, same login, but on the other side. So you would log in using our login. You can find information about the property itself. They kind of both give you roughly the same thing. It just looks different. But you want to pull that information. That's public data. You want to find out as much as you can about the property. You want to pull the tax records. Order a prelim, as I'd mentioned. And if possible, even order a net sheet. Net sheets are, if those of you who are new and don't know what that term is or what that means is, it's basically what the seller will get in proceeds when you sell for a certain amount, and then also including the closing costs and what have you. That's super helpful, I've found. And when I do a net sheet, I don't just do one. I will usually put 2 or 3 together. If you sell it for this is what your proceeds will be. If you sell it for this is what your proceeds will be. So it helps get them into the range of what they want to sell for. And then you do your listing presentation, which I noted on here. There's some great resources and command and designs and so forth that you can build your own. I highly recommend that you do that, by the way. And your listing presentation could include some marketing materials, some testimonials from past clients and so forth, comparable sales. I also noted on here too, I don't know if any of you guys attended Gene Rivers' listing clinic. It's phenomenal. That class was amazing. We try to get him to do something for us a couple times a year. So this was the first one. We're going to do another one later. And when I was in production, I would do something called a pre-listing packet. And that's something that Gene was talking about as well. And so a pre-listing packet is really marketing stuff. It's not stuff to do specifically with their property, but my pre-listing packet would have I would go on to Google and I'd just do an image of the exterior of their home and personalize it, like, made out specifically for Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and it has my information on it. When you look inside of it, it's just all the marketing stuff as my client reviews and testimonials, my marketing as to what I'm going to do, and all that kind of stuff. And the benefit is, if you have a listing appointment next Tuesday, for instance, you would send this thing out, the pre-listing packet, today. And the benefit of that, number one, it shows that you're a professional, but what if they're competing, what if you're competing, which you very well likely are in this kind of market? They might have a friend or family, or they might not be competing at the time they spoke with you, but they, on tomorrow or Thursday, they spoke to someone at work and they're like, oh, you're using Tony, you should use Rachel. And so suddenly now there's another agent in their head about who they should contact. The pre-listing packet, you send it to them, you already stand out in the crowd. And then now they kind of feel a little bit obligated to ensure that they meet with you because you took the time to kind of present this whole thing. And then when you show up, you're showing up with the property specific information, such as the tax assessor information. So you're not including that in the pre-listing. That's something you walk in physically. And by the way, for agents that are in coaching, you have to go through the coaching program first. So you know what's what and what documents that you're going to need and so forth and how to read them. But when you're done with coaching, and those of you who are not in coaching or already out of coaching, we have a concierge service that does pre-listing and listing packets for you so that you don't even have to do it. So it's just a service that you can get. We also do MLS uploads. That's a service that's available. We also have contract writing. That's another service that's available. Those are available once you graduate coaching. We want to make sure that you know the process first, and then you can utilize all those kind of things after. So in the listing, when you're looking this up, I put in here 62. You can see kind of, by the way, Kauai people, I'm sorry, this is High Central on Oahu, but it's a similar function that you would do on yours. It just, the interface looks a little bit different. But when you're searching for that property that you're going to do a listing presentation on, what I recommend is you put the address, you put the street name on there, and the sold parameters, you make it 0, you zero it out so that you can do a proper search. And when you do that, it'll pop up. It'll pop up with all the sales of record, so you can see the history of the transaction for that property that you're going to do a listing presentation on. And then it pops up. In this case, it's the same property, but it's been sold, 3 different times for 3 different amounts. And I like to know about it, so I kind of go through all of them and see the different state and condition, what agents were involved in the transaction, to get a better idea of what's going on with the property prior to me arriving. Then, and this is on the High Central side, you guys have access to it on Kauai too with both Realist and Hawaii Information Service. In this case, Realist is free. So if you clicked on Realist, you can pull up that information as well. So when you pull up that information on Realist, it'll pop up just like this. That's public information. So if you got off the phone with the guy and the guy says, for instance, oh yeah, I have a 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom house, and you pull it up on Realist and it's 3-bedroom, 3-bath, it's not an issue, but that warrants another phone call back to the seller. Hey, just want to get some clarification. I want to make sure I'm looking at the right property. You mentioned it's 5 bedrooms. I'm seeing it as 3 bedrooms. Did you add rooms to the property? I just want to verify the address with you. You need that conversation, because he could say, oh, you know what? Yeah, I didn't get it permitted. Or the permits are still being filed. I'm waiting for them to be closed out. Those are all things that you need to know as you prepare to go to market. Because if he's going to close out those permits and it will convert over to a 5-bedroom, in a couple of weeks, great, no problem at all. That'd be awesome. But if it's not even permitted at all, well, we potentially have an issue, because he might want to sell this 5-bedroom home that he thinks is worth $1 million. But as a 3-bedroom home, it might be worth, 100 to 150,000 less than that. And the conversation you need to have with that seller is educating them about if there's financing on the other side, this is going to come out in the wash on the appraisal. So why is Realist or Hawaii Information Service or any public record search important? You can find out owner information, again, who you're talking to. You can see the flood zone information, what flood zone that they're in, or you can go to the flood zone map as well. You can see the TMK and the legal description. You can see the tax assessment information. You can see some of the characteristics of the property. You can even click on the building permits, some of the features, listing information, last market sales history, mortgage information, which is also super helpful. That's actually really helpful, because any liens on the property will pop up. Not any, but in most cases, they'll pop up. And then it'll give you links to tax records. So when you look at that and you click on it, clicking on the TMK brought me immediately to the tax record information. And if you guys look in the tax record information, it tells you right there what the land value is, the improvement value is, if there's any homeowner exemptions, that are applicable on the property and what the total assessed value is. Now, for new agents, assessed value, which is this, and market value and appraised value are not the same things. And that's really important to understand. So interestingly, sometimes I'll deal with a buyer and they'll go, oh, this home is being offered at 900,000, but the assessed value is 822. So it's way overpriced. I just want to pay 822. It's funny though, because when they're reversed and they're selling and you go, oh, you want 900, but its assessed value is only 822. It doesn't work in reverse for some reason, but assessed value is the value that the tax assessor's office is basing the value on for the sole purpose of taxing them for property taxes. The market value is what what potential buyers are willing to pay for the property. So, and then the appraised value is what and a certified and licensed appraiser will deem the property based upon comps and other market demands.
I have
So
a comment. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Chad.
Yes, sir.
So right now, like it's being not in between years, but I just, it's more of a comment or I don't know, or maybe a question to you, like that. You know how the 2022 assessed values have come out. So for listings now, we're putting the 2022 assessed value, but for purposes of the monthly taxes, it's only prior year taxes, so it's 2021 taxes technically. So there's a little bit of an inconsistency. But I don't know how to address that. Is there?
Well, so what he's asking is sometimes there's a lag on the information on when it was assessed and the value. I would just base it on whatever shows up here. So we're in 2022, but if the assessment, the most current information for assessed value, like to use this as an example, it says 2021, I would just put 2021 because you're always deferring back to public data and not something that you're coming up with. And God forbid, don't do this. Don't ever assess it on your own. Don't go, I think it's going to go up, but just go off of this. This is easily referred back to. So although we're in 2022, if I pull this up and the assessment year is 2021, just use that. Even though we're right in the middle, I think it's February and August is when they reassess or they bill you for that. So it's going to come out any moment now. I would still use that 2021 if that's what shows and that's what's available. In the corner there, you'll see the plat map PDF. When you click on that, it pops up with the plat map. So helpful information. And these are the kind of things that I typically would bring with me on a listing presentation. Although it seems rather benign, I find that sellers like it. Like they go, oh my gosh, I'd never seen this. Where'd you get this from? They really feel like you've taken a lot of time to pull, like, I think in their mind visually that you're like in the archives, like you're pulling like microfiche together and you're doing all this other kind of thing, right? Printing all these things out when in fact, these things are readily available, but a lot of agents don't use it. Then when you go to the parcel map, and you click on that, it shows a satellite view of the property. Again, they like that. They get a kick out of seeing their property, where it is in a neighborhood and so forth. How you calculate real property taxes. Every island is a little bit different, but this is an example of how it's being calculated. So it'll tell you exactly right there. The DPP, as you scroll down a little bit, there's that link there, and you click on that, it'll tell you everything, all the parcels, all the information that the DPP has on a specific property. By the way, this shouldn't be in lieu of a building permit package. The building permit package is far more informational and robust in terms of the content, but this is a great way to get started on some of that stuff too. So it has current sketches, and this is past sales information, current tax bill information. Is really helpful to know. All the historical tax information. And then when you order a prelim for new agents, I get this asked all the time, like, what do I go to order a prelim? Just send an email, new prelim request, 123 Aloha Way, and then ask for them to send it as quickly as possible. It usually takes a few days. So that's why you want to get ahead of that, but you really want to have that prelim prior to going to the listing presentation. I get it if someone calls you and say, hey, can you come over today or tomorrow? You're not going to have that. I get it, but don't make it a habit. You should be in the habit of being prepared. And then here's how you order net sheet, an example of that. They're going to literally take what you're providing to them. So when you order it, remember I mentioned before, I typically will do like 3. Please give me a net sheet for 880, 890, 900. And here's the fees to apply to that. My commissions is 6% and doc fee and survey, because they're literally order takers. They're going to go off of exactly what you're saying. So the benefit is they're going to put in there 880, all the commissions, and they're going to net it out to what the seller's proceeds are. In this case, when you're going to the listing presentation, you can then go, hey, by the way, what do you owe on your mortgage? Oh, I owe 500. Oh, great. And then we just kind of write that in there, and now they have their proceeds. When they prepare that net sheet, this is what it looks like. So this is kind of an example of a closing statement you guys have seen before, but this is all just, the net sheet is all in advance, but it shows like you really put your homework. You did your homework on getting prepared for this listing presentation. So speaking of listing presentations, if you go to templates in Command Designs, it has all those kind of things. There's also a ton of videos in Command and in Connect and other resources on YouTube and so forth that tell you how to put it together and why it's important, and some scripts for that. Then what you're going to want to do is pull comps. How do you do that? We can help you with that. We have classes for that. The MLS has classes for that. These are past, but these are what this look like. It's Learn CMA, comparative market analysis. So you can work with your broker, you can work with your coach. I can help you. MLS can help you. Tons of classes on comps. So what documents are needed for a listing? When you take a listing, we need obviously the listing agreement. We need the MLS prop type form. We need the KW standard addendum. We need the COVID addendum, the dual agency disclosure, as well as the first Hawaii title ABA. And let's see here. I'm going to go through why we need these kind of things, but it's pretty self-explanatory for the most part. So obviously you're going to mark an X. The brokerage is a realtor. That kind of is missed sometimes. Authorized representative title is for trusts, LLCs, POAs, and that sort of thing. What documents are needed for a listing? A4 is that listing period. Try to make the listing 12 months with an option to terminate after 6 to 9 months. That part is negotiable. That depends on you and the seller. But what we don't want you to get in the habit of is trying to get a listing for the period of 1 month or 2 months or 3 months. That's detrimental, because if the person's not committed to you for longer than that, they're going to be a pain in the butt to deal with anyways. But you can make it a 12-month listing with the first option to terminate within a few months. But the benefit of doing that is you don't have to redo the listing, and the listing doesn't automatically withdraw or expire. So you kind of want to have a little bit of time. A5 is the listing price. This must be completed before BIC signs it. So sometimes people send it to us blank. We don't know what you're putting on there. So we want to help give you some guidance. So make sure that you complete that. It can be changed, an amendment, or when you present it to the seller can say, I don't want to sell it for $1 million. I want to sell it for $950 or whatever it is. That's fine. They can cross it out, write $950, initial it, and then the BIC will also see it and initial it too. A7, this is the compensation. So this is what's going to go onto the MLS I'm sorry, this is not going to go to the MLS. This is the total compensation that the firm gets. So this would be your 6% or 5% plus GET or not including GET or whatever that is, whatever you come up with. So that's a total commission that the seller is going to be paying at closing. Whereas the difference is on A9 on the bottom there. That's the compensation that's being paid to the buyer's agent, and that number is reflected onto the MLS. So does that make sense? So if you're charging a total of 6%, but you're paying the buyer's agent 2.5%, some sellers might look at it and go, wait a minute, why am I paying 6% plus 2.5%? So I'm paying 8.5%. No, A9 is coming out of A7. So make sure that you know that and how to separate that out. A8, the protection period. I would consider a 90-day at minimum protection period. What that basically means is that if you've marketed this property, you've spent time, sending it to your sphere, it's been on the MLS, you've done some showings, you've contacted buyer's agents, you've done open houses, and you feel like, man, any day now I'm so close to getting a potential offer, but nothing has come to fruition as of yet. That 90-day, if that seller cancels or terminates the listing agreement, that 90-day protection period is at any of the buyers that you have to give them a list within 10 days of them canceling or terminating the agreement. But that protection list that you provide them is if any of those buyers on that list are the ones that provide an offer within that protection period, you still get paid your commission. That's what that protection period means. So 90 days is certainly enough time for, if someone's interested based upon the efforts that you put forth for marketing, that you should be compensated for. A10 is the additional information, additional terms that I'd mentioned before, like seller authorizes delayed MLS entry until blank, or seller agrees to reimburse listing agent for marketing or photos in the amount of X, whatever that might be. Ask your BIC, ask your broker, don't be creative. A11, you must have the following 4 items and more depending on what it is. Like you could also have lead-based paint if it's applicable. Lead-based paint is for properties that are built 1978 or earlier. But the 4 that you have to have is KW standard addendum, the dual agency. Some people will ask, well, why would I put dual agency? I don't know if it's dual agency. I'm just taking the listing. It's because this particular agreement, the listing agreement, was not created by KW. It's created by the board, but there's only a small blurb about dual agency. It's very small. Whereas a dual agency form, that 2-page document, we want the seller, one of the easiest ways to get sued, by the way, in our industry is dual agency. So we want the sellers to read the dual agency addendum and make sure that they understand what dual agency is. So this is just disclosure. It's not that they're agreeing to do a dual agency. We don't even know yet if we have a dual agency. This is just ensuring that they understand what dual agency is. COVID addendum, similar thing, is the COVID addendum is the one that allows you to extend the contract due to COVID related reason. It doesn't mean that someone caught COVID. It means that because of COVID, like a good example is we had a file where a lender couldn't get the payoff in time because they had a fax machine to a building that was unoccupied because everyone was working from home because of COVID. So it delayed everything. That's the reason why you would use that COVID addendum, even though it's not someone caught COVID. That's what people kind of think. That COVID addendum tends to benefit the buyer, not so much the seller. So why would we include the COVID addendum? It's a disclosure. We just want the seller to know that this document may show up in our offer, and it's very likely we're going to try to counter that out. So it's not being executed. It's being acknowledged because we're disclosing it. And then lastly, the first Hawaii title ABA is we have interest in first Hawaii title, so we need to disclose with the public. It doesn't matter, again, if you use first Hawaii title or not, we still have to disclose it. Tony, I saw you come off of mute. Did you want to chime in on something?
Yeah, I wanted to chime in on with regards to the dual agency disclosure is that, in the contract, there is a section that the seller either agrees or doesn't agree to dual agency. And so, as the agent, if you're automatically checking the box that says dual agency, then they should review and sign the dual agency addendum as well, or disclosure. And if they don't agree to it, you should probably just have it signed anyway, but just let everybody else know in KW if they do have a buyer that they're gonna just have to represent the buyer only. There's also a change coming to the dual agency disclosure as to where you can be a dual agent, but you as the buyer's agent can advocate for on behalf of your client, and the listing agent can advocate for their seller. It'll be a form of dual agency, but this way you'll be almost acting like if you're an outside broker.
Do you remember that term? I forgot the term that they're using now for that. Do you remember what it's called?
Yeah, designated agency.
Designated agency. So that's a new type of agency that's coming down the pike. It's a little tricky. They're trying to do the paperwork and all that now, but it's really good in concept, which allows a little bit more protection for the agents. So that's a listing agreement portion of it. This one I'm gonna stop here because this is more of the MLS entry portion of it. But I'm gonna stop share. I know there's a bunch of questions. I want to make sure I answer everyone. Or anyone can come off of mute too if you have a specific question. Is it called a net sheet if you're on the buy side too? Yeah, it's the same thing. Can you accept the buyer who's going through a divorce? A buyer who's going, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. The law specifically is talking about sellers because there's real property that's tied to it. If a buyer is going through a divorce, I would still absolutely make sure that you ask the proper questions, maybe get a divorce decree or anything like that, because you want to make sure they're not using funds that it's supposed to be tied to something else. For the wrong reasons, that they're using some of those proceeds. But I would ask for the divorce decree, maybe even loop in their attorney to make sure that you're above board. That's a good question though.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Hey, Tony, could you just go over that last little bit about designated agency again?
If a KW agent represents a buyer in a purchase contract, that agent, as long as the seller knows that you're a designated agent or you're taking the designated agent status, you can negotiate, you can possibly disclose certain things about your buyer that you can't do under dual agency. There will be a layer of protection as to where both agents will be assigned a separate broker to help negotiate and to facilitate the transaction, and also to keep both sides out of trouble.
The reason why, by the way, that's coming up, just so you know, if you don't know dual agency well, and it sounds like what is Tony even talking about? It's because dual agency, you can't negotiate on either part. So if we're all under KW as an example, I'm using you guys as an example. Let's say Maria is representing the buyer and Daniel is representing the seller. The seller is actually Maria's client just as much as the buyer is, and vice versa. So you can't create an advantage or disadvantage for either client because we're under a dual agency. So even though some people think in their minds that a dual agent means that I, as the agent, or Maria, represents both the buyer and seller, and that's dual agent. The dual agency can also be that they're with the same firm, like their buyer and seller are also with KW in this example. So the designated agency allows a little bit more flexibility to advocate and help the buyer and seller if both are under the KW brokerage, if that makes sense. That designated agency is a kind of a newer concept, and that's not out yet, but that's what they're working on. So we hope to see that soon. Did that help answer that question?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks so much.
James, you asked, should or could the SRPDS be updated as a result of the findings in J1? Yeah, there's no definite, yes or no. It kind of depends on the content. Like, it depends on what's in it. Are you updating because the light switch doesn't work? Or are you updating because the roof is on its last leg and has about 12 months left on it per the home inspector? It's not a right or wrong thing, but it's what's important to the buyer or whomever you represent. And even if you represent the seller and you find that out, and because you attended the home inspection and you found out from the home inspector for the buyer who's not your client that the roof is on its last leg, and you know about that, yeah, I would absolutely recommend to my seller to update that for sure. And by the way, too, sometimes when you guys, so that could also be a point of negotiation too, is that if you find something in the home inspection, you ask for an updated, even if you're outside of the home inspection period, if you update the SRPDS, there is a potential window for you to terminate as well. So it opens up another avenue for to either renegotiate or to exit the contract, rightfully so. Dean, you have a question?
Yeah, quick question. This is more from the association side. So if we have it in writing from the association, this is more like the information about, when we're trying to get listing information about fees, what they include, and owner occupancy rates. So, we got a response that's saying, okay, owner occupancy rate is this much. And then looking at prior listings, it's seemed to be a lot lower. And then when I had the title pull me a distribution list of all of the owners and split them apart by owners and investors, the owner occupancy rate was also lower than what the association responded. So point is the association gives me this number, but all other information is pointing toward a lower owner occupancy rate. Any guidance in terms of what to do in that situation?
Are you representing the buyer or seller?
A seller. This is for the listing. Seller.
You know, under certain circumstances, I don't know that we're obligated to physically investigate the whereabouts of every single owner in a given association. That's not a requirement that I'm aware of at all. And the reason why I asked if it's buyer or seller, if it's seller and you're doing your standard phone calls of that kind of information, I would use the information that the HOA provided. I'd get the name of the individual that gave me the information.
We have an email. We have email response.
Then perfect. Then you're kind of putting that back on them. That's the information that they provided. If, however, it was a buyer and the buyer said, hey, my goal is, it's really, really important that I occupy a property that has mostly buyers. And as you guys know too, if it's mostly investors, it tends to show up in the quality and appearance and the upkeep of the community. So maybe that's an important thing to that specific buyer when you represent them. I really would love to have a vast majority be owner occupants. That's a different thing. Then your forensic research might be worthwhile to properly represent and advocate for your buyer.
And to your point too, my understanding besides that is, before when underwriting was a little bit different, I don't know if that was a reason for that disclosure, before they.
Some lenders won't lend on buildings if they're less than a certain percentage of owner occupancy, right?
Yeah, I think after the subprime, it was like 50%, right? Before.
Well, it's not even subprime. It's also conventional loans and VA loans and all those kind of things have their certain guidance and rules. I can do a blurb or a video that I'll send out. It doesn't warrant a whole class, but for condos specifically, there's kind of a cheat sheet that I would teach on or look at for RO 105C of the things that agents should gravitate to first when you're looking at that, because so if you get that information before it even gets underwritten, you're going to know if there's a problem right then and there before the underwriter even sees it. A lot of times I think agents kind of just cross their fingers and hope that no one says anything or the underwriter passes the sniff test, so to speak. But you can see it coming down the pike, and it could be in the form of a delinquency ratio. It could be in the form of non-owner occupancy ratios. It could be in the form of litigation or liens on the association. There's a handful of things.
Well, thanks, man.
Any other questions? Maria, I know you have a question. I'm picking on her just because I can see her face.
I don't have any questions, but this was a good class.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. Guys, if there aren't any other questions, it is recorded. We will absolutely, Jessica, I'll talk to you off air about your question. But if there's anything else that you guys have with regards to Srpds or listings, please don't hesitate to ask me, ask your coach, ask your broker. We're recording it as always. We'll send out the slides and the recording. We'll have everything available, but we're here for you. So thank you so much for investing in yourself and pouring into in yourself and coming to the class. Keep learning, keep growing. And if there's anything you need, reach out to me. I'm happy to help. But otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Take care. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank you. Awesome.